Eaglesmere was originally a community that began in the late 1800s. The cottage where I live in the summertime was built in 1875. In its heyday, Eaglesmere was known for its clean air, so that it encouraged asthmatics and people who needed to come live in fresh mountain air to come stay up here. We had boardwalks and modern plumbing, and that was really the selling point back at the turn of the century, late 1800s, early 1900s. Then you hit a quiet lull when we all went to Howard Johnson's and Holiday Inns growing up. And then there was a resurgence where families like my family started coming back again to Eaglesmere, where I've been coming since I was 16. And now my children, my grandchildren, are fourth generation to come back here and enjoy this incredible, pristine community. If you look across the lake, you'll see a very steep hill coming down, and you'll see the hill comes down to the lake edge, and that is where the firemen and the EMTs build what we call the toboggan slide every winter when it's cold enough to cut these huge blocks of ice from the lake with tools that were made back in the turn of the century, the 20th century. And we float them, and they're stacked and routed, and then you can come and rent toboggans where you can sit 6 to 8 people and ride down this amazing slide that is like a roller coaster. And when the ice is really, really good, you can shoot the whole way across the lake to where you and I are standing now. And it is the major fundraiser for the fire company and the ambulance company here in Eaglesmere. And this is the weekend I think they're going to build it. Our community depends on the lake. It not only for the recreation, but for the sustenance. 20 years ago, we summer residents drank the water out of this lake. That's how pure it is. And 20 years ago, we decided to all go on wells. So every family up here has an individual well, and our lake has a very, very adequate alkaline level, which a lot of Pennsylvania lakes do not because of the acidic factor. And all of the alkaline refurbishing of the lake that occurs over the winter comes from behind me and off to the left. So as we stand here speaking, there is underground water that is refurbishing the alkalinity of this lake, so that by spring, if you talk to Bill Feast, who is our mayor here in Eaglesmere and a fabulous biologist, environmentalist, he can talk to you about the alkalinity and acidity of the lake and how we have a very, very healthy lake because of the tributaries that feed the lake over the fall and the winter. So to disturb that ecosystem could be tragic, both for the health of the lake, subsequently the health of the community, and for everybody who lives here, both on a permanent basis and as a summer resident. But imagine what would happen if the water supply were contaminated by methane gas or anything else that has to do with the fracking. And we all know that those may or may not happen, but just if you look at this splendor, think about what would happen if our well waters or the lake water becomes contaminated in any way. You lose this incredible spot that is a very, very special place. And having said that, I think not only does Eaglesmere need to be careful about what happens with Marcellus Shale drilling, we all need to be careful, from Dimmock to New York to Pennsylvania. I mean, everything needs to be done with the utmost caution and the best management and the best technology. I don't think we have that quite yet.
We've been coming up here since 1988, and we bought a house in 1993. We have 2 homes in Eaglesmere and 2 houses immediately outside of Eaglesmere. And I'm also a property owner. My wife and I collectively with another party own roughly 400 acres of land here. So we have the perspective of somebody that owns property that's developable from a gas perspective. In other words, we own the underlying gas rights. And we've gone through the process with a couple of the gas companies, not yet signed a lease. So I think I'm well versed on what the forms of the lease look like, what the options are at this point, what the pricing is. And I also sit on the national board of Trout Unlimited. And so I have an environmental orientation, particularly one that relates to cold water issues. And I think if I tried to crystallize my own thought process and some of the issues here in the community, Eaglesmere has been a community that's over 150 odd years attempted to protect the local environment. It puts a high value on maintaining the lake, maintaining the surrounding area. It was astute enough a number of years ago to create a local conservancy, and for many years I was a board member of that conservancy. And so there's a great sensitivity to the local environment. Obviously, with the gas companies and the possibility of extraction from shale coming into play here in the last couple of years, it's been a big surprise. I think it's a positive event in the sense that we do need a national energy policy. We do need access to energy reserves. I frankly think, personally, and I think a lot of people locally would probably agree with me, that gas drilling is inevitable. The issue, I think, however, is how you do it and when you do it. And the big concern that I have at the moment is that we're early in the process. There have been some mistakes made. Everybody here depends on groundwater, and their groundwater wells are anywhere from 300 to 700 feet deep. And if there's any impact on the local water or on the lake, it absolutely destroys a community that's been here forever. So I think the big issue in front of the local community is what to do with various large holdings of land that could be drilled, and how to do it, in a way that's sensitive to the local environment. And at the moment, the Country Club, which comprises about 500 some odd acres, is one such parcel that is being considered for gas lease. I don't know what the outcome's going to be there. I mean, there's a board that runs the Country Club, and there's a shareholder group that elects the board, and there is a legal process that requires shareholder approval to take on any lease. But it abuts the town, it abuts the lake. It has significant potential both to be rewarding to the Country Club and the community, and also to be destructive. And so I think in a perfect world, what you'd like to do is to take as much time as necessary to do it right, to understand what the right techniques are, to control it in a way that's sensitive to the town. And frankly, if I were doing it and had sole control, I'd probably take another year or 2 years before I committed myself. And the rationale there is I think there's a lot to be learned over the course of the next year or two as more of these wells are sunk, and they learn more about what the risks are and how you control those risks.
Well, do you have confidence in the regulatory process in the state of Pennsylvania, or do you think that given the status of the technology right now as we speak, that you would have drilling done in a safe manner that would not endanger your water?
Well, I think we need to be fair to the regulators. The regulators are learning just as everybody else is learning in this process. My biggest concern is that the regulators are underfunded, undermanned, and I think to some degree I would view them as being co-opted to the state's agenda, and the state's agenda is to push for gas development because the state has not managed its expenditures well. And so there's a high demand for any source of revenue that can be taxed. And so, logically, I think you've got to sit there and say, do you want to assume that you can depend on your state government when your state government's got massive budget deficits and it's got a distorted incentive to have development take place? And let me back that up with a specific example. About 18 months, 2 years ago, the state went out to bid to lease hundreds of thousands of state forest for gas drilling. I was considering leasing my own property at that point in time, and I went out and requested the bid document. So I got the lease form that the state was using in its engagement with the various gas drilling companies. The assumption was that if the state was doing it, the state was going to do it right, that they would have the most environmental sensitivity. You'd see that in the way the lease was formulated. And the output, or the outcome, was shocking. When I read the lease, and I read every page of it, as a private citizen, I can't develop my own property within a mile of a high-value feeder stream to high-value trout streams. In the case of the state government leasing state forest land, they're permitting the leasees to go with 100 feet of a high-value water source. I mean, I think that tells you in the most direct fashion, what the issues are. You've got a regulator and you've got a government that are, dealing with conflicting issues. And so I think this is where, as a member of the local community, you have to form your own opinions, not with whether you fundamentally dislike regulation, but whether you think regulation has the right motivation at this point in time. And I'm a skeptic.
So it sounds like there's a lot of convincing that's going to happen before you would sign on the dotted line.
Well, I think my point is, I'm not going to sit there and assume that the regulator is going to perform the job that we as a citizen might expect them in terms of protecting our interests, our water sources, and other issues that might be of a pollution or road congestion or whatever the issues are. I think it's incumbent upon us as landowners and as people who have the underlying right to make the decision to lease or not lease, to use our own best judgment in this process. I think that's what's going on right now. And I think further to my issue of trusting your own government, all the legislators in Harrisburg are all lined up to create unitization, which is stealing individual property rights.
Unitization, another term for, in New York we call it compulsory integration. It's basically like eminent domain.
Well, it's worse. I mean, because this is absolute outright theft of property rights. And today, if I negotiate with a gas company, I could probably come away with a lease that would provide me with $6,000 of upfront compensation and 20% royalties. If the unitization goes through, you're not going to get any upfront payment, and you're going to get a 12.5% royalty. I mean, it's removing free market discipline. It's catering to the gas companies, and it's stealing individual property rights. I mean, and there's no other motivation here than to jack up state revenues. So, do I trust my government? No.
Do you believe that a landowners association would be able to construct a lease that would give adequate protections and enforceable?
I think there are a couple of elements to that question. I mean, the first is, could you approach the issue in a sensitive, thoughtful fashion? I think the answer to that is absolutely. How do you do that in a commercial world? I think you do that by assembling the largest possible block of land. So if we took Eaglesmere as an example, if you could take the Conservancy that owns 350 acres, if you could take the population in the town, and I don't know what the town is, but let's for a moment assume the town covers another 500, 700 acres, and you've got individual property owners, if they could donate their rights and get a tax benefit to the Conservancy. So now the Conservancy's got a 1,000-acre block. You put it together with the country club with 500 acres, and maybe you take other property owners like me and others that have blocks surrounding it. To the extent you make that block unified and larger in scale, you're going to get more ability to negotiate with the oil and gas companies. But you got to know what you want to include in the lease. You got to know what's sensible. You got to know what's controllable, and you got to be confident that the state of the industry in drilling the Marcellus is at a point that they know. And while a lot of these wells are working and they're not creating problems, there are those that are not. And I'm not yet convinced that some of that isn't unique to the underlying geology, which, a year from now, they're going to correct. They're going to know how to deal with those issues. The problem is, if it's like buying an airplane. You don't want to be serial number 1. You want to be serial number 100. You want 99 other people up there to have played test pilot. You want them to have figured out what the problems are before you put your butt in the plane and feel safe. And I think, that's probably a proper analogy to where we are right now.
Learning how to do it right is a process that's not instantaneous. It takes the industry a considerable length of time to go through the process of learning how to do it right. And so we have the Soutners here from DEMIC, and they will testify to the fact that this didn't start out with companies automatically understanding how to do it right. Clearly, DEMIC was a case study of how not to do it, and it presented some challenges that we've learned, and hopefully industry will move forward from that point. This is an extraordinarily complex industry that will not learn if it's not allowed to practice. It has to practice. So then maybe the question is, how fast does the industry move forward in learning how to do it right? It is, I think, entirely true that the industry doesn't learn how to do it right if the industry is shut down. Industry has to be given space to figure it out. And then we have the role of the policemen meaning the environmental protection agencies of the states and whatnot. These policemen have to be ever vigilant in trying to get industry to do it right. Yeah, people have sacrificed. And in fact is right now what's happening is that the people of Sullivan County are being asked to sacrifice. The sacrifice, of course, is that this is an industry that can't come in without leaving some scars behind. It's necessary to build drill pads. It's necessary to run pipelines and whatnot to exploit this energy. So really then the question comes down to one of which, how does America move forward into the future? What is its source of energy? I've already made the case. The premise, of course, is that energy consumption and the economy and your lifestyle really are locked together so completely that we can't suddenly decide, well, we don't need that energy. So I asked right in here, wasn't President Kennedy asking people to consider doing things that might benefit the country more than themselves? And the point I was making to this reporter in Voices was that, in fact, the people of DEMIC have already done that in spades. And their sacrifice hopefully will, if the gas industry continues to evolve, benefit other people. The people living in someplace else in Bradford County, for example, have the people of DEMIC to thank for pointing the industry in the right direction.
My opinion is that this is an example of fire, ready, aim. Did you get that? Okay. Nobody was ready in 2008 to proceed this way. And my colleague Terry knows it. In fact, he said it. He was quoted in the Financial Times earlier, well, last summer, as saying, "You realize that in Pennsylvania, the DEP, as recently as the spring of 2008, did not have a strategy for dealing with gas production from the Marcellus." So my question is, why did they let it happen? If this is not just an execution of a corporate business plan, rather than a well thought out national strategy to, as Terry just pointed out, find a way to make us less dependent on foreign energy sources, find a way to maintain our standard of living, buy time for sustainable energy to come online. What was the rush? And as Terry said numerous times in his talk, and industry has to experiment. Industry has to learn what went wrong to get it right the next time. The industry evolves that way, and writing reports is not going to replace the experience of doing this. But I don't know about you, but in New York State, starting 2 or 3 years ago, when things were starting to heat up there, we were told that over 1 million gas and oil wells had been hydraulically fractured in the United States and nothing had ever gone wrong. And we're just going into the 13th year of development of the Barnett Shale Formation in Texas, where there have been over 10,000 high-volume, slick-water, hydraulic fractured gas wells. So how much more experimentation is needed? So you can't have it both ways. You can't say that the industry is mature and safe from day one, which is what they were saying on day one and continue to say now, and then continue to say they have to make more mistakes to develop a standard operating practice to get it right. Experiments in industry are typically done in an industrial setting, in a zoned industrial area inside a building or a complex, where when things go wrong, they get it right, and the people outside that zone and outside that complex don't even know it. But as you well know, the industry is asking us to make a sacrifice so that we now live in their industrial zone. It's not walled off. Whatever fluids, solids, and gases are emitted from this industrial process are emitted into our atmosphere and our backyards and our streams. So doing the experiments, they've had plenty of time to do. So I'm just wondering when they're going to get it right, and I'll come back to the point of whether getting it right is still getting it wrong.
Please ask them to wrap up with a question that's at the very heart of what was supposed to be a debate, okay, and that is the question, why rush?
Yeah. Okay, I think that's fair enough, and that's how we will close out this evening. Why rush, gentlemen? Why rush to the gas?
Yeah, all right, I will go first because I was largely responsible for the rush. And you saw my tombstone up there, incidentally, you guys, so that's still up hanging in the balance. And at any rate, the effect of what I did was to commit industry to spending somewhere between $200 million and $1 billion on land acquisition. Land acquisition is not permanent. Often leases are 5-year leases. And the rush really is not to obtain natural gas necessarily. We all saw what happened when we rushed to obtain natural gas. The price went through the basement. That didn't help industry. But industry is running against the very severe constraints of a clock ticking away very rapidly. If they don't drill to hold, they lose that $1 billion. And I can't apologize for it. This is the way the system works. And no one is going to walk away from that $1 billion. That's probably the reason for the rush, if you ask why the rush. Now, there are a lot of reasons why that shouldn't happen, but the rush is a consequence of the economics of the play, that $1 billion up front.
I think Terry nailed the reason for the rush, but my reaction to that reason is the following. We live in a capitalist society, and part of capitalism is risk. And the industry took a risk by investing too early, too big, and I'm sorry, there's no good reason why we should effectively subsidize that risk and guarantee that the companies still make money. I'm sorry. That's how capitalism is supposed to work. You're not guaranteed a profit. So, those are my last words.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to thank our presenters.
I've always been of the opinion that America needs to rid itself of the use of fossil fuels. I know that a stopgap in the meantime is the every use of natural gas. I know that Pennsylvania and its citizens need the money that this bonanza can produce. And one of these professors was the guy who released the study that started this rush and caused the price per acre to go from $50,000 to $8,000 and millions of state lands to be leased. But the two professors talked about the fact that after 3.5 years, we have leased millions of acres and begun to frack hundreds of wells, but there will be thousands of these. And the cumulative impact on Pennsylvania and its people and its forests and its animals and its water supplies is enormous, and I think tremendously threatening. There is no need to rush to this. It needs to have an adequate energy plan coinciding with the national energy plan. And any plan can't just have objectives. It needs a schedule and a plan, or it's just a set of dreams. One of these professors kept trying to make the point that he thought that all of these problems they were having with trucks and with spills and with drills and with cement would be worked out by industry. Well, this industry's been hard at work in Colorado and Wyoming and Texas for years. These people that are driving these trucks and driving these drills are not neophytes. And we're still having these tremendous numbers of violations. One of the professors made the point that he figured they were going to catch on to this and industry would do the right thing. I speak up because as an Air Force colonel, I'm probably more aware of what damage Iraq did with 4,000 people dead, and Afghanistan killing hundreds every day, and hundreds of families being left with people remarkably scarred and broken for the rest of their lives in their families and on their lands. I know that Pennsylvania, with its grandfathered gas-powered and coal-powered electric generating plants kill 2,000 Pennsylvanians every year, and that millions more suffer from asthma and hay fever and job loss and school loss and so forth. And industry from year to year has never done anything voluntarily, and administrations from Ridge to Rendell have never fixed those. And as you videotaped this morning, those same people are being killed every day by the soot and particulates. So to expect industry to voluntarily take the right steps to do the right thing is rather innocent and stupid. The Rendell administration went to fast permitting so they could get permits in 3 days. We need to go to a moratorium on permits until we're sure we know we have the right kinds of inspectors, the right numbers of inspectors, do the right numbers of inspections, and understand the cumulative impact of the drilling for gas in Pennsylvania. I think we need to do it, but we cannot do it if it's not done right.